Welcome, everybody. How's everybody doing? Let me just do this real quick here so that we got good sound. Okay, cool. All right. So today we're talking Rush. Um, and I've got a couple of folks on here that are big Rush fans. One of the gentlemen, Martin, has actually written a few books on Rush, so super knowledgeable um, guys on Rush. And we're just going to have a fun discussion. And if you've got questions and things in the chat, please pop them in and please tag me so that I can see your questions in the chat as we go through this. So, first off, I'll bring Martin in. Hey, Martin, how are you?
Hey, doing okay, Hack. Thanks for having me, man.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And also, we have with us Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility. Hey, guys, how are you?
How's everybody doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I just want to say hello to a few people here real quick. Thunder Falcon is with us. Zach Thong, Captain Beyond, welcome. Half Ace, Nick is with us. Hank Hill, Hugh Caldwell, D-Tube. Wow. Dwight, Janice, Charlie S, welcome everybody. Gussie Wells, Sandra, Zach, welcome everybody. So before we get into the Rush thing, I think we should say a little thing about the major loss that we had yesterday. We were talking about that a little bit off there. Eddie Van Halen. Um, this really answered a lot of questions about why you didn't hear a lot about, there's a lot of people saying, hey, why don't they just get together and do something? But you kind of know why now, don't you? He must have been in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty quiet for a while there, but I mean, it just always seemed like it was a less serious form of cancer. It was quite localized, right? I mean, it started on his lip, but he died of throat cancer, so that's obviously pretty grave. But it just seemed like Eddie was always going to be with us. That he would conquer this because he's a superhero, right? He's the greatest guitarist of all time, possibly.
Yeah.
It's him and Jimi Hendrix, and that's really, those are the two biggest guitar heroes essentially ever. I mean, I never hear anybody in the discussion, that rivals those top two slots. So yeah, very, very sad news.
Yeah, I was saying this yesterday. I was live a bit yesterday, and I was saying, even if you're not a Van Halen fan, you can't deny the impact that he's had on the world of guitar playing. I mean, there's guitarists before him, and then there's guitarists after him, and you hear his influence on pretty much everything, everywhere. It's all over. All the modern guitar players are taking a page out of his book. I mean, it's undeniable.
Basically, every guitar player that came in his wake throughout the 80s. I mean, he set the blueprint, just like kind of Jimmy did for that kind of blues-based, heavier rock style, 10 years prior. I mean, Eddie did the same thing.
Yeah,
10 years later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Eddie died 50 years to within a couple of weeks of when Jimmy died, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Jimmy followed upon that whole, or he was part of that guitar hero oeuvre with Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck. But really, I mean, Jimi Hendrix is kind of bar none the leader from that. And as you said, Pete, I mean, essentially, Eddie started the whole idea of the guitar hero all over again. The idea of shredding, obviously, the more localized idea of tapping. He didn't invent it, but it was his big thing. And then you've got, all the hair metal bands, the moving of the fulcrum back to California, right, for a whole 10-year period there. But all the hair metal bands had to have a good guitarist, and you got guitar instructional videos, you got guitar only albums, right? And it was all because of basically Eddie and Eruption, essentially, right?
Yeah. It all kind of just flows from there. Yeah, that's true. All right, but we're here to talk about Rush. So let's delve right into it. So I just want to mention real quick, I got this book yesterday. You can see that. This is Martin's book on the early years of Rush, and I'm a third of the way through it. It's real hard to put down. No stone was unturned. If you're a Rush geek at all, highly recommend Martin's books. They're absolutely fantastic. So I just want to go around. I want to talk about what was your first exposure to Rush? And did you necessarily become a fan right away, or was it a slow build? We'll start with you, Martin.
Well, for me, you know, I can never remember the exact early time, but I definitely remember that I was completely already a fan and knew everything the moment Creme FM in Spokane, Washington was playing 2112 in full, and I'm standing there with my fingers on play and record, getting ready to tape the whole album off of the radio, Spokane, Washington, right? So, you know, so that's 1976. I was 13. You know, I certainly by that point would have had the previous 3 albums, but I don't remember what order they first came in. But yeah, rest assured, by 13 I was already you know, a full blown Rush head. So
you're on board. What about you, Pete?
It was about 78 for me. So I was about 12, and the first album I actually heard, a friend of mine had bought the All the World's a Stage album. That's the first thing I ever heard from them, and I was really impressed. And then from there, I went and checked out Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres. And then, you know, before you know it, and I would consider myself at that time, I was a fan, but not a massive fan yet. Moving Pictures is what made me to become like a massive fan. And that just helped me get into the earlier albums even more and everything that came after it. But it was a live album that really kind of hooked me for the first time. And just the raw aggression of that album, which, you know, totally for a young kid at the time, that was everything that I was into, right? Because I was a Kiss fan, and you talked about Kiss quite a bit, and so that to me was like, whoa, this is a little more sophisticated, really loud, lots of great guitars, and I was hooked. That was it. And then, you know, I started to get more into the kind of more progressive stuff that they were doing, which was really interesting.
Yeah, you know, it's like, I mean, I'm in Toronto, so, you know, I mean, being in Toronto, it's like, you know, you gotta love hockey, you gotta drink Tim's, and you gotta like Rush. I mean, or they deport you. I mean, we were getting bombarded with Rush here. Like, I mean, it was on the radio constantly. It was you know, in the high school halls, like everybody was talking about it was Rush. Everybody was, you know, they were in the air, and but I mean, it was what they used to do, and I don't know if anyone in here is old enough to remember and is local and old enough to remember this, but when they used to release a new record, they would play the entire record on Q107. Rush would be in the studio with the DJs, and they would talk about every cut. And they did that with Moving Pictures, and I remember them doing that with the Signals record. I mean, that's you know, that's how big they were in Toronto. But it's with Rush. I had a friend who had an older brother, and he was playing Rush, and I believe the record he was playing at that time may have been Moving Pictures, or might have been Spirit of Radio, like in around that time. And you know, it was a slow build for me, but once I started getting into them and I started buying the records, I was probably about 13, 14, and they were on just a complete other plane. You know, me coming from Kiss, they were like in a separate plane. I mean, I could give you stories. I remember guys when I was in grade 9 for English assignments, they would hand in Rush lyrics thinking the teacher would know. It's rough, you know. I mean, that's how much they permeated. They were just everywhere. I mean, you couldn't help but become a Rush fan if you know, sooner or later it was going to get into your system. And but you know, I held on to Rush. Right up until Signals. And then I cashed out in the 80s for a long time. Right, as soon as they started to get a little bit too keyboard heavy, and I think that's the story for a lot of people. You know, once they start getting too heavy into the keyboards, I kind of cashed out. What about you? Have you guys stayed with them pretty much all the way through, or were there moments where you're like kind of moving in and out of their?
I did that same thing. I started to get upset at them around Power Windows. And I remember I was living in Hamilton at the time because I was going to McMaster doing my MBA at that point. So I was a BC guy, but already, you know, so I'm now immersed in this Rush everywhere sort of thing, right? And Power Windows came out, and I remember every album seemed to come out in the middle of winter with Rush. That was the other weird thing. It just seems to be a memory to me that Rush is like the ultimate winter band, but you know, obviously they're Canadian, right? So, but yeah, I did the same thing. I cashed out. I came in and back, and you know, and I know Pete's a total, you know, you love your very heavy metal, right? I can imagine you cashed out a few times along the way too. But
oh, I did, yeah. After Race Under Pressure, I was kind of like, all right, I'm kind of dumb. I mean, I was still listening to stuff, but I really wasn't into it. I started getting into thrash big time and much heavier stuff. So I didn't really like start coming back to Rush till about like Roll the Bones time. And Test for Echo, and all the counterparts. Certainly, that's when I was kind of like, all right, Rush is like putting some of the keyboards and synths aside, and the guitar are coming back out again. So I started getting back into it. But I'm a bit older then, right? So I'm moving away from the really, really heavy stuff for parts of the 90s, and I really embraced that latter 80s era way afterwards, because at the time I just wasn't really interested. I was into much heavier stuff, and those albums to me were just really commercial, way too many synths, too poppy, and I still love the early stuff. But yeah, I checked out too.
Too thin, no bottom end. I mean, there's a lot to complain about there, right? And there's short songs and stuff, and we all love our prog, right? So, you know, the classic Hemispheres, Farewell to King stuff is great. But I remember sort of coming back around with Counterparts. Stick It Out was an advanced single, right, Hack?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was all over the radio as an advanced thing. It was all over MTV even, right? And they're grungy and dark and all that stuff, right? And then, you know, obviously there's the tragedies and stuff. And I was not a big Test for Echo guy, but I mean, I really liked Vapor Trails. I mean, the lyrics are just so devastating on that record. And it's a very unique, singular sort of sound. It reminds me almost a little bit like avant-garde King Crimson-y at times at that point. And then the albums after that were pretty cool too, because they kind of went back, and there was the heaviness and there was the bottom. And back when Nick came back, but so it's a lot of up and down. But you know, I still feel like I'm a pretty deep fan. I always think there's all these bands where people will complain that if you don't like every single album, you're not a fan or whatever. But I suppose if you're a deep fan of a band, you'll like even a few of them that you're not really supposed to like as much, and that's kind of me too. Like I move right in, and Signals is actually my favorite Rush album in a lot of ways. I've often said that one or Hemispheres, but I really liked Grace Under Pressure quite a bit when it came out.
That's great, yeah.
But then, I started getting annoyed. But, you know, the very first time I ever got annoyed with Rush was Farewell to Kings. I mean, at that point, we were raging metalheads. I was 15 years old, and it was mellower than 2112, and I was ticked off, right? But then they kind of came back. I thought, you know, Hemispheres was pretty heavy. Permanent Waves was pretty heavy. 2112 is, Moving Pictures is pretty heavy. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, my ears started to perk up again with Rush when the Counterparts came out, and Stick It Out, and it's like, whoa, there's Alex, he's back, heavy guitar. It's now guitar driven again, which is, you know, as a guitar player, that's what I want to hear. But yeah, and then what's cool is with me, it's, you know, when I go back to Rush, it's because I left them for so many years, and then when I come back, and again older. Now I start listening to Grace Under Pressure, like that's a pretty good record, you know, and there's a lot of really good songs in there. And the funny thing with Rush too is, you know, if you're listening to a song and if you don't like how it starts, just give it a minute. It'll be a different song. Give it 2 minutes, it's another song. You know what I mean? There's even within their songs, there's like 3 or 4, like one Rush song would feed like a whole album for another band, just about, you know, because they've got all that variety in there. And if you don't like one bit, you know, just give it a minute, something else will come out, right?
Remember the classic Stephen Colbert joke when they played live on Stephen Colbert? He asks the band, he sits them down, and he says, "Your songs are so long. Do you find that by the end of your songs, you're influenced by the band you were at the beginning of the song?"
Yeah, exactly. But so in terms of were you guys, for me it's always been music one and then the lyrics afterwards. Were you more drawn to the lyrical content, or was it the music mainly?
Well, I've never been much of a lyric guy, ever. To me, it's always been about the music. But I will say, when I first started to get into Rush, them and Kansas were like the two bands that I was really interested in reading the lyrics to. And I can't say that I do that about many bands. But yeah, I mean, lyrically, especially those 70s albums, I mean, you know, if you're like a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid and you're reading that kind of stuff, and I loved like fantasy and science fiction books at the time, I mean, it was right up my alley, right up my alley.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was listening to Farewell to Kings today earlier, and there's all this sci-fi stories in there. It's pretty cool. And I wish somebody would tell me what the hell Honeydew was, because I've never seen it.
Yeah, you pick up all those literary references and you go off and you look stuff up, and that happened with a lot of bands, but it happened more often with more intensity with Rush. And then later on, like, Neil just became like a really good poet of encapsulating a nice turn of phrase in a line or two. So even those records where, you know, to me, I always liken Presto and Roll the Bones to the band playing in a matchbox. You know, I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. But still, at the same time, you know, Neil's lyrics are there, and there's a lot you can get into there. A lot of great stories and a lot of great emotions, right?
Yeah. No, he's a hell of a writer, no doubt. And but that 80s period as well, like, no, it wasn't just the keyboards that sort of turned me off. Neil started doing the electronic drums thing, which I am not a fan of, because I've got, like, when I went back to Rush, like, I went and I got, you know, all any live DVD or Blu-ray, I have them all. And when you're watching the ones from the 80s, like on is it the Presto tour or the tour before that? I can't remember. Show of Hands. Anyway, you're listening to the drums and they just sound like he's hitting, I don't know, cardboard. There's nothing there. There's no resonance. And then the other thing that drove me nuts is Alex's guitar was like so thin. You know, it like in the recordings it was great, but live it just sounded so thin. Like there was no, you know, the one thing with Rush for me, the necessity always, I have to hear that heavy guitar, you know, and it's all about the power chords, you know. And in the beginning there was a lot of power chords, and then they sort of kind of went away in the 80s, and as a matter, and the guitar went away. The songs were all built around the keyboards. The guitar was like an accompanying instrument now.
Yeah. Well, you know, Mark,
guitarists. I mean, what is your views of Alex as a guitarist? Like, what is his style, do you think, if he has one?
He's a very unique player, I think. And,
yeah.
You know, to go with what you were talking about during the 80s, I mean, he and Martin and I talked about this on my show too. It's like, I think he was listening to a lot of the Police right around that time.
Yeah.
And Andy Summers was less on riffs and solos and much more on textures and colors. And I think that's what Alex was going for in the 80s. And with all the synths coming into the music, there was like a less of a need to have those big heavy riffs. I think after a couple albums, he kind of got tired of that, though.
Yeah,
like, I want to contribute more here. But personally, I think he's a very unique player. You know, early on, a lot of people said he was kind of like a Jimmy Page knockoff and whatever. I never kind of got that. Yeah, he played kind of bluesy, heavy rock early on, but I think he's an absolutely fantastic player. He can come up with great riffs in his solos. You know, you talk about guys who write these solos for these songs, and the solos are like a well thought out, constructed part of the song. It's almost just as important as everything else happening in that composition. And I mean, how many times can you, I mean, we all do it, right? There's so many Alex Lifeson solos where we all know every note in our head. Yeah. We can all hum along to it. We already know that solo note for note. We may not be able to play it, especially if you're not a musician, you can't, but you know the solo. When it comes up, you know every single note, every sound that's coming out. That's a really good guitar player who can create memorable solos that are mini songs within a song. And he is one of the best ever at doing that.
Yeah, the Jimmy Page thing, I never got that either. I mean, okay, look at, well, I'm wearing the First Record t-shirt here, but the First Record, yeah, it's bluesy rock, but I don't hear a lot of, I mean, apart from they're playing the same scales, but I don't hear a lot of Jimmy in his playing. I don't. I just hear like a 70s guy, like at that point, your typical 70s rock guitar player. That's what I heard at that point. But what's really cool about Alex is he's like a chameleon, right? Like he can adjust himself to basically anything, you know. He went from like, I'm the main guy, I'm the riff guy, I play the solo and that's it. And then he kind of went from that guy on the first record, and then they started doing all this, you know, more proggy stuff, you know, Caress of Steel and so on. Like there's like, it seemed like there's nothing that guy could do, or couldn't do, I should say, you know. And the parts that he came up with, you know, even when he wasn't the main guy, when he was the accompanist, those parts are amazing, you know, like they just flesh out, because, you know, again, it's a three-piece band, but those parts, without them, those songs just fall flat.
Yeah.
He always comes up with really great parts.
Yep.
You know, and any style, like is and you know, Rush does not stick to one style. I mean, they, you know, they're all over the place, but the guy's just, and technically, I mean, he's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think even on a lot of those like 80s albums, whether you like them or not, there's some really great guitar solos and guitar textures on all those albums.
Yeah,
They really are very well thought out. And even though he may have been, you know, had a shorter window to actually say what he wanted to say compared to the later stuff and the early stuff, I still think if you go back, especially myself and someone who wasn't really into them at the time, but has been revisiting those albums quite a bit in recent years, some really fantastic guitar work on those albums. As brief as it may sound and seem, you're absolutely right. He's a guy who really thinks a lot about his craft and what he puts down in the studio, and it really shows.
Yeah,
I want to address the thing about the drums too. I mean, it's interesting with this band because they're so intellectually curious all the time. They're early adopters of technology, right? Geddy is in there at, you know, at the nascent, at the birth of synthesizers, tinkling away at that stuff. You see those pictures, it's hilarious, of his small little setup, you know, around permanent waves and moving into moving pictures, and then it grows and grows. Never quite gets to be the like Keith Emerson or Greg Giuffria level, but you know, he's there kind of learning as this stuff's coming up, and the same thing happened to a lot of drummers. And so Neil's in there, he's hitting all this stuff, and the Simmons or Sin drums or whatever, the electronic drums. But you know, when you're enthusiastic about new things and toys, and you're just you know, curious about creativity, period, sometimes you use these things as an early adopter, and it bites you in the butt eventually. It becomes a dated thing that maybe you overdid at the time. So, you know, while other people might have waited and not done that stuff and said, oh, we're more analog, man, you know, they kind of might have come out better at the end, because what we've sort of found is that 70s things have essentially remained cool, or they're cool again or whatever, and all these 80s sounds still are waiting for their day to be seen as cool again. It hasn't kind of happened yet, right? 80s fashion, or 80s sounds, or 80s production, or Mutt Lange, those Def Leppard albums or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it does seem a little overdone and stuff. I mean, just apropos of nothing, I've been listening to a lot of kind of late mid-period Golden Earring, and I thought what they did with electronic production on like the NEWS album and Something Heavy Going Down and When the Lady Smiles, like, go listen to that song, right? And on the Cut album and stuff, I thought what they did kind of stood the test of time for use of highly processed drums. And then, but yeah, I mean, Rush, it is probably a little bit that they overdid it. But, you know, I've talked to so many Rush fans that was their entry point, right? It's all about when you came into these bands, and they swear by those records and love them. But, you know, I guess for us, we're ticked off at them by that point.
Yeah, because we came in when they were still basically your guitar-based band. We got one question here, Guitar Hack. Have any of you seen Rush live? And if so, what tour was the best? Start with you, Martin.
I haven't seen them live. A lot of times people are really surprised at this. But basically, I came from a small town, so it was a slow ramp up to seeing a lot of concerts. I've probably seen Rush live, I would say, somewhere between 3 and 5 times, 3 and 6 times. I think every single time was here in Toronto. I've been now in Toronto for about 30 years now. So along that whole 30 years, you know, it was always Molson Amphitheater or Air Canada Centre. I couldn't tell you which tours they were, but they're all pretty recent. I mean, I don't go back long ways with Rush.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you what tours, I couldn't tell you the set lists or whatever. I'm not a big concert guy. I sit in a concert and I go, this is a waste of time. What am I doing here? You know, like we do this all the time, like journalists and people in the industry. We're in a show, in a club show, and after about 3 or 4 songs, we're like kind of peeking around, looking at the exits. Is someone going to see me leave? You know, if I leave this place, right? So I don't know. That's a long rant, and maybe for a show one day, Pete. But we'll talk about the positives and negatives of concerts, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. I'm not a big concert guy.
What about you, Pete?
I saw them on the Moving Pictures tour. I saw them on the Signals tour, and then they caught their final tour at Madison Square Garden, which was phenomenal because they played, you know, new stuff all the way to old stuff to finish it all off, and that was great. But I got to say, the Moving Picture show, I'll always remember that. I mean, it was a young kid and just really starting to get into the band big, and they were just absolutely amazing. And you know, they played a lot of that old stuff, a lot of the then new album. Just a really great show. That's it, just 3 times, and I've seen like hundreds of concerts, but for whatever reason, you know, all throughout the rest after the Signals tour and up until, you know, just a few years ago, I went like 30 years without seeing Rush. Strangely enough, I mean, I had plenty of opportunity, just never did.
Yeah. Well, I got a similar story. Like I saw them when I was way young, on the Signals tour, and talk about adopters of early technology. I still remember one of the memories I have is a Signals tour when they were doing Red Barchetta. They had a video screen behind them with an animated car. I mean, it looked so cheesy now by today's standards, but I mean, they're already starting with that sort of thing. But I saw that, and then you know, then like I said, I cashed out when I came back to Rush. It's like, oh, next time they come, and unfortunately, I only saw them the second time was on the farewell tour, and I got to say that was, oh man, that show was just unbelievable. You know, I mean, I turned my brother on to Rush. I have a younger brother who's also a guitar player, and I mean, you had 2 grown men weeping when Alex came out with a double neck white guitar and started playing Xanadu.
Yeah,
it was like that. Like
it was it was epic. Yeah.
It was just, oh man, what a great show. What a great show. The one thing with Rush though, and I mean, I can watch their, I mean, like I said, I've got all their, you know, every Blu-ray they put out. I can watch their shows over and over again, and I just sit there and I'm just blown away by the musicianship. I mean, playing that music so technical and so correctly, and it's good. You know, it's good stuff. It just, I could sit there and just watch those shows endlessly. I never get tired of them.
Yeah, I think, you know, this idea of it being good stuff, I think there's the heartbeat of the idea that Alex and Neil, I mean, they came from that power trio concept of the Who and Cream, a little bit of prog, but there's something beating in the heart of them, the hard rocker, the early hard rocker. Like, you know, they you know, you can get them to talk about their influences, and they will, and there's plenty of that. But there's not a massive amount of that. But when they do talk about their influences, you really do hear the love for Cream, the Who, you know, Jimi Hendrix, all that kind of stuff, Led Zeppelin, all power trio stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I guess there's the beating heart of the power trio, and that's what you hear that makes it good, aggressive music.
Yeah, because I mean, I am not a progressive rock fan. I don't like Genesis. I don't like, I mean, the odd song, yes, the odd song. I'm not a prog rock guy at all, but I love Rush. Rush made it, I guess, made prog rock acceptable to the hard rock folks, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, the changes and all that stuff, whatever. I can. It's easily digestible for me. I actually love that stuff. The more off the cuff they are, the happier I get. You know, but they seem to be the only band for me, and I think for most people, that they can get away with it for whatever reason. Maybe it's like you were saying, because beneath that lies just a hard rock band, Martin. I don't know.
Well, yeah, when you're a young musician too. I mean, all the young musicians I grew up with, totally worshipped Rush and loved it. I mean, my fondest memory is second year university. I had my apartment, but down the street, a cool, acquaintance buddy had a house and he had a loft, and that's where I kept my drums. And I would go there after school. It's getting dark. Beautiful little town, Nelson, BC, and learn all the songs from Signals. And that's probably why Signals is my favorite album, because I just woodshedded to that album so much. I had the massive drum kit and the whole bit. But I can think of my bass buddies. I can think of other drummers. It was always about learning Neil's licks, right? And I can think of the guitarists, and we would jam that stuff all the time. So it was always super electric. So when you're an adolescent, you love the electric stuff. And it was always on the edge of, you could learn this stuff. It wasn't that hard to learn. It wasn't Steely Dan Asia or whatever, Mahavishnu Orchestra, right? You could sort it out and you could learn it. And that's what made it so fun to follow.
Well, Rush, I mean, as a player, somebody trying to learn how to play an instrument, Rush set a bar. It's like, if you could play Rush, you're pretty good. You could play any regular rock band if you can play Rush, if you can cover Rush. They always, even in high school, I remember when when we were first picking up guitars and stuff. I was like, hey man, I can play Limelight. I'm like, holy shit, you're really good. It was like that was the bar, being able to play a Rush tune back then.
The bar was always the easy bar to fall to get over. But it still felt impressive was when you could count a 7/4 beat and do it pretty easily and instinctively, or 5/4. You could drop a beat or whatever. That was kind of the cool thing about Rush too. It made it fun to have the slightly odd time signatures because the guitar was cranked up, right?
Yeah,
and everybody was rocking out. So
yeah. And getting back to Alex for a minute, I mean, when people talk about great guitar players, for whatever reason, his name doesn't come up. And I think it's part of the reason is because he's with two other guys that are also amazing. Do you know what I mean? It's not like him and then the other guys. They're all up here, and he gets lost in the mix, unfortunately, I think. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I agree. Because I think a lot of the guys that we put at the top of those lists are guys that were the man in their bands, right? And I think Rush, you had three men who were, like you said, they were on the same plateau, all three virtuosos, all three superstars for what they did. And you kind of saw Rush as Rush, those three guys, the three faces. You didn't see Rush as Alex Lifeson. Like, we talk about Van Halen, right? It's Eddie. You talk about The Experience, it's Jimmy. You talk about Led Zeppelin, it's Jimmy Page. You talk about Deep Purple, it's Ritchie Blackmore. We can go on and on and on, right? But with Rush, you had three absolute virtuosos. I mean, every guy would win like the Reader's Poll in Guitar, Bass, and Drum magazine year after year after year, or come pretty close to it, right? So, yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that. I think he was just as talented as so many of the other guys that we look at that kind of godly status. But because he came from a band of three such strong individuals, musically speaking, it's not like they got lost in the shuffle. Because, I mean, for whatever reason, like Neil is thought of as that guy when you talk about drummers.
Yeah.
And I think that Geddy also, for me anyway, is one of those guys. But I also don't think he's the first guy you think of when you think of the great bass players of all time. He's always been one of my favorites. It's the same thing with Alex. So I think Neil kind of rose above a little bit, and maybe because he was the lyricist in the band, right? Maybe that had a lot to do with it. I don't know. But Alex deserved to be.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Taylor 315, thank you so much for the super chat. Can you ask Pete and Martin why, in their opinion, was great show, guys? Can you ask Pete why, in their opinion, was not well received by the critics?
Oh, meaning Rush?
I guess he means Rush in general. Yeah.
Jeez. That's a good question. I think early on, especially, I mean, the critics hated them early on because I think many of the critics felt that the lyrics were kind of pretentious. And, in the 70s, critics did not like, fantasy sci-fi lyrics. And unless you're talking about, going out to the drive-in with your date and all that kind of stuff and these, pretty love songs. And they were the antithesis of that. So I think the long songs and, quite frankly, when Rush was starting to break big, prog rock was kind of already dying by that point, and the critics hated that. So here we have another band that's kind of, and I remember reading a lot of reviews back then of like this, you know, big heavy Led Zeppelin riffage type band with all these prog rock lyrics and extended songs and all that kind of stuff. And to them, that's all garbage. It's not a winning formula at all. I think most of the critics probably thought that Rush would die a quick death at some point. That never happened, obviously. I think that they were more well received by the critics later in their career after all those years. And I think the critics finally kind of warmed up to them. But early on, yeah, all the magazines and the newspapers absolutely hated them.
Oh, Rolling Stone hated.
I mean, to add a couple things. So to recap, yeah, critics hated prog, critics hated hard rock. You also had a singer with a borderline novelty voice. I mean, we're not talking Family or Pavlov's Dog here, but or Zebra, right? You know, with the falsetto, or King Diamond. But we're talking a borderline novelty voice. You know, he was compared to Robert Plant a lot, but I mean, I don't really see that comparison. I do see it as a borderline novelty voice, but also, you know, the standard, the gold standard was Jan Werner and Rolling Stone and loving singer-songwriters and the Avocado Mafia people, you know, the country rock, Linda Ronstadt and Eagles and J.D. Souther and the Troubadour and Laura Nyro, and, you know, so, and the San Francisco sound. Yeah, so there's, the critics all loved a completely different type of music from this stuff. But having said that, you know, I remember Circus always basically patronized Rush quite well, and they didn't really make fun of them, and they got a lot of press in Circus. Cream kind of made fun of them, but still covered them in Parade as well. So yeah, so there's a lot of you know, marks against them, and punk came in, right? So as soon as this this feeling that there's some intellectual value to stripping back and being a more aggressive band, that anybody can do it, and blah 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 and all that. But so I mean, basically, to put it in a nutshell, Rush was doing everything that went against, you know, proper custom of what a critic would like.
Yeah, and I mean, if you talk about Rolling Stone in particular, they hated everybody. Led Zeppelin was crap. You know, Rush was crap. Everybody was crap.
That's right. Yeah.
You know. Here's another question, and this one is really tough, man. Autism Rocks asks, what do you all think is the most underrated Rush song?
Yeah,
that's a toughie.
Underrated. I guess I have my pick. You go ahead, though, Pete. Or do you want me? Do you want to buy some time and let me go?
Go ahead, Martin.
Okay, well, I suppose one that comes to mind all the time is a song I keep calling my favorite Rush song of all time, "Circumstances," and it's not a super crazy famous one. So I would say that's pretty underrated for me. I mean, I can think of a lot of songs that are so low rated that barely people even know what they are, but that's because I don't like them very much because they are from those albums we talked about. But "Circumstances" is a really pretty heavy, crunchy rock, you know.
I love that song.
And so I would say it's a little underrated. It's not one that a lot of people think of.
I would think for me, I'm going to kind of go with a weird choice here. And in fact, I saw someone made a comment in the chat, a clarification about the question before, and they were actually wanted to know why Caress of Steel was so not well received. Okay. I think for me, those two epics on that album, Romance or The Fountain of Length, for me, I love both of them, and so many people love this band's epics. From the album, you know, from 2112 and the albums that came right after. I personally love both of those songs, and I think that Caress of Steel is like the overlooked gem in their catalog. I get it. It's totally not very accessible. It's pretty heavy and dark, and I totally get all that, but that's the reason why I love it so much. And I think you could pick anything off of that album, but those two epics, I think, for me, are absolutely underrated. I love them, and for whatever reason, people who loved, you know, the Xanadu's and all the, you know, Cygnus and all those other songs, and they never seem to talk about those. And that's kind of where Rush, that's the genesis of all that stuff that came after, I think, writing that kind of longer form composition, so to speak. So those would be my picks.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm struggling here. Underrated.
You got to do it.
What do you call it? I know. Digital Man off of Signals.
Great song.
Yeah, a crazy riff. I don't know. The guy's fingers are just, I don't know how he pulls these things out. Analog Kid's another one. Digital Man, Analog Kid.
The whole topic of underrated is very difficult, as Martin and I know firsthand.
Yeah.
We decided to do a whole show on underrated bands. Man, what a
I
can of worms that opened up, huh?
Yeah, you had to lay out, okay, here's what we're calling underrated. And you had to lay out all these rules and conditions.
Yeah.
That was funny. I thought I had another question here. Okay, so the Caress of Steel. So why did it get beaten up? What do you guys think? I figured just the fact that the songs were long and tedious. And it just
it's got a pretty opaque, uninviting album cover, so you're already spooked out and scared about it, right? With the whole kind of alchemy look to the thing, and then you open the gatefold, and it's still medieval and dark looking, right? The production is probably a little bit missing a little bit of the bottom end that Fly By Night had. You're also going into it from Fly By Night, which is a minor bit of a hit record for them. Things were working up for them, right? They had a hit single with Fly By Night, the band, and there's a lot of energy behind them. And Bytor, all the kids in school are talking about Bytor and the Snow Dog, and so it's it's dark. Getty is pretty extreme on it, right? As a vocalist, he's kind of scary on that record, right? He's shrieking away like a crazy witch from Macbeth, right? So I guess it's a dark album, and the production and obviously the long songs and stuff, and the little jokey song, I think I'm going bald or whatever. One of the heaviest songs of all time, Bastille Day. So.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny you mentioned about Getty shrieking. I remember one of the interviews with him. Where he was talking about having to sing over the stuff. He goes, "Yeah, we'd make up all the music, and I wouldn't even think about what key it was in until he tried singing it and realized you had to sing way up high to be in key with it, because that was never a thought. It's like, here's they compose all this thing and never consider, is it in a comfortable key from the sing, and then it would be an afterthought, and then that is why he's screeching half the time, because he's like trying to nail these ridiculously high keys, right?
Yeah. And let's remember, their record label absolutely hated that album. So that album was not going to do good regardless. And I think, they were, and then you can read all about this in Martin's book, but basically they were told, your next album's got to be a big one, because we don't like the direction things are going. And they turned around and did like the exact same thing, even more extreme. And look what happened. Everybody bought into it. So you never know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, they called that tour Down the Tubes tour, because they were going from like, they were talking about, they were doing shows with Ted Nugent and like bars. That's how they got brought down to the next level because of that record. But 2112. In reading, speaking of your book, which I received Martin's book Anthem yesterday, it's amazing.
Follow up. That's this just came in, so that's the Limelight Rush in the 80s. So there's the follow up.
Yeah,
the third one to come in the spring of 2021. Driven Rush in the 90s, and in quote marks, in the end.
There you go. Yeah, no stone unturned. I will definitely, for sure. There's anything you want to know about Rush is in this book. But the one thing in reading the book that strikes me is, when you're reading the story about how they came together, how Alex and Getty came together, and then now I'm blanking on the manager's name.
Ray Daniels.
It's almost like everything was kind of meant to be. Do you know what I mean? And when they all started getting together and doing gigs, and Ray Daniels is 16, they're like 15, and they're already doing the high school gymnasium circuit, because they can't play the bars, and then when they get to 18. Ontario happens to drop the drinking age. Like, everything is just laid out beautifully. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like their whole direction, their whole trajectory was meant to be.
Yeah, it takes a long time though. I mean, this is a band that Yeah, I mean, you could actually say truly this is a band that played their dues. I mean, I often, with Eddie just dying, it's like comparing them to Van Halen. It's like they all had this about 4 year, if not, I mean, it's actually longer for Rush, but they all had this around 4 year period. But Van Halen got to basically do the whole thing in nice sunny LA and back and forth across town. Rush kind of, they're in Canada, number one, and they're going far away. I mean, they're going to to very cold places in Ontario. They aren't quite in the States or anything like that yet. They're not all over the place, but they're all over Ontario at least. So they're definitely paying their dues, but they're young. It's not that far from home. Like I say, they're not crossing borders or anything yet. It's not a, they're not dealing with a bunch of criminals all the time. It is gymnasiums and things like that, right? So, but yeah, and then it's funny you mentioned that too, Hack, about because they talk about how important that is about the drinking age coming down, and Ray Daniels, he's like leaves home, he's at 16, he's already a mover shaker in Yorkville and all that. Fascinating story, right?
It's crazy. I mean, I'm not by what I was saying. I'm not suggesting they had an easy time of it. Yeah, it was like from 68 to 74 to release the first record. Yeah, they paid their dues, but they had the right people in place right from the get go, and everybody, and they stuck with those people for all this time. I mean, how many other stories have you heard where members are coming and going, and managers are ripping off their artists? Like they just happened to everything, just like their team, let's call it, happened to come together beautifully. Meeting Neil, having Neil as a drummer on their audition, and they only ever had one audition, and the third guy that walks in is Neil Peart. I mean, come on, this was meant to be. That's what I keep thinking as I'm reading this story. It's like, man, this was destined.
Interesting, yeah, and very loyal front office. Like that's one of the themes throughout the three books is the idea that basically, all like most of the road crew and all that, there were pretty much no fallings out. Same with the office. There's tiny bit of drama, but not really that much. I mean, basically, yeah, super stable on the personnel tip all the way through.
Yeah, like I mean, they Howard, I'm gonna butcher his last name, Unger. Yeah. Was their first road manager, and then was with them right till the very end doing their lighting. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a big organization, and you would move up the ranks, right? You'd get a low level job, and you'd move up, and then at the end of it, you're running a huge team of people.
Yeah, and I mean, it's all these folks that their first roadie, became the president of SRO. I just started to read a little bit about that. It's almost like they worked for Rush, and Rush supported them. They're 40 years, like their entire career. All you've done is work for Rush. Like that's insane. Name me another band that could say that. You know what I mean? It's crazy. That's how stable it is.
That's what you call a rock and roll family, right?
Yeah, it's so impressive. It really is. Here's a question. Ask Martin and or Pete, why is it that no one already had Neil in their band? Oh, Neil was in a band when he auditioned. He's asking about Neil Peart. Before Rush, he was in a band doing the same circuit as Geddy, and at the time John Rutsey and Alex, doing the high school circuit. And what was the name of the band? You remember, Martin?
He was in the Majority. I think there was a band called Mumbling Something. He might even been in that band Hush, if I remember. But basically, and then the big story is he just packed up his stuff and went to London and tried to make it in England. That's a big part of the Neil lore, right? And he was quite demoralized about how he was surrounded by really good musicians, and he's living in squalor, and he's got his little job there and stuff. And he basically, felt he came home defeated with his tail between the legs, and thought, I'm going to work in Dad's, farm equipment business dealership for the rest of my life, and I'm going to be perfectly happy with it. And the staff loved him because he was a super personable guy, and he did a really good job. But then, as you say, Hack, fortune dawned on him, right? I think what was it? A little like a red Corvette showed up one day, and they said, "We want you in this band." And then Neil's close family, and should I go do this? And oh yeah, go do this. So he piled off to the east end of Toronto and did that audition, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I love the father's comment when he said, "Okay, you know, two things." He goes, "First, we got to ask your mom," and then the second thing is, go and do it because this is your dream. Your dream is not to sell, you know, parts, you know, whatever, or farm parts, whatever it was. So J.R. Flood, Modern Day Warrior. Thanks so much. That's the band I was trying to remember. It was J.R. Flood. Yeah.
Yes, it's a bunch of bands along the way, and there are even recordings of these you could hear, and there's promo pictures they did and all this stuff, and there's the odd cool live shot of Neil from those days. So yeah, he was doing it. He was doing it,
and he was pretty accomplished. From, I mean, when they rehearsed him, he already was kind of Neil Peart. He wasn't, you know, in the process. He was already kind of there.
Yeah,
which is, I mean, insane. I mean, you know, auditioning drummers. I mean, I can tell you horror stories about auditioning drummers. To have the third guy walk in be Neil Peart, that's like hitting the lottery, man. It's just crazy, you know. And then at the same time, we can't write lyrics. You talk better than us. And then the guy turns into like this. You know what I mean? It's just everything. You know, it just blows my mind. Like, holy shit, these guys are like, you know, it goes on and on. Here's a comment from Don. Getty once complained about Neil's lyric being too wordy to fit into a melody. Has there ever been a situation when the band strongly disagreed over the content origin of the lyrics? That'd be a question for Martin, I guess.
You want me to answer that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty interesting thing. Like you say, Don, I mean, it's a big deal when a lyricist has to put these things into words. I mean, or into vocals. First of all, Getty and Neil have quite a similar, world view on life. You know, I suppose you would call them both skeptics and atheists. I suppose they're both very intellectually minded. Neil is very respectful of what is going to come out of Getty's mouth, that it should be something that he believes in as well. So Neil would tailor his lyrics that way as well. There weren't a lot of disagreements over that kind of thing. I do recall one thing, I suppose is going to be in the third book, maybe. I believe there were a few things around Vapor Trails that Getty felt was almost too personal to Neil's experience, that they needed to be universalized a little bit. And Getty would work on them in terms of, it was a 50-50 when it came to that, pesky thing about phrasing and how much can I get in here. And, I always remember Bruce Dickinson telling me once about having to sing Trooper. And he said, when I would sing Trooper, my mouth would be full of blood because I'd be chipping off little bits of my tongue because of all the words I had to get in. Right. So these are real problems for lyricists, getting the sounds, the P sounds and the T sounds. They talk about that sort of thing as well, but just the transition between various consonants and things and how many words you can cram in. So, I think Neil was a smart enough guy to both on the philosophical and on the phrasing end, not given something that was just too ludicrous. But he perfectly understood that Getty was going to have to work on it to get it into, to bang it even more into song form.
Well, you could see a huge difference. I mean, when you look at, Caress of Steel, for example, and all the words that Getty's got to spit out, and then you go back to the later 80s and the 90s stuff, and now he's just singing.
Mm-hmm.
He's able to sing, not just get every word out. He's actually able to sing. And surprisingly, who would have thought that Getty has such a beautiful voice? Because when he started, like, if you listen to the more recent stuff, like The Garden, for example, off of Clockwork Angels, I mean, the guy's got a really nice sounding voice. A guy who is known as this sort of, like you were saying, Martin, like almost, comic, like shrieker guy, to a guy who's got a very, I guess maybe part of that is his age and his voice is kind of, mellowed a little bit. But he's got a really good voice. I think he's one of the best singers out there now, Question. Okay, people are digging the show. Just reading some of these comments. Awesome. So the John Rutsey thing, you talk about it in your book, actually, to great detail, Martin. The whole story behind why John Rutsey, was left the band early on. There's really no way they could have been Rush with John Rutsey, though. Eh?
Yeah, it's like John Rutsey, kind of in a way, is the Paul Di'Anno or the Ace Frehley of the band, right? He's a little bit wild, he's a little bit scary, so he's not quite lining up with the polite Canadian boys trying to make this a career, right? Trying to do it, much more properly, right? So it was touchy. Nobody wanted to hurt anybody's feelings. They were concerned for him, but it sounded like essentially A, he had diabetes, and B, he wasn't taking care of himself very well. So he was a drinker and a drugging kind of guy, right? He was the party guy. But you look at that early footage that was found of them playing in that high school and stuff, and it's quite amazing to see John sitting there behind his little drum kit, and he's the MC of the band, right?
Yeah.
He's the spokesman of the band. So he's kind of like he's a dominating personality at the same time that he's a little bit scary, right? And but then also they didn't line up really on the musical end of things. He was more of a glam rocker, a blues rocker, and I guess it basically, Neil and Geddy looked at themselves one day and realized, hey, we kind of want to bring some prog into this as well and really grow. So there was that going on as well. But and I don't think it was so much his drumming. I don't think they felt that he was a lousy drummer or anything at that point, but they just felt like A, their personalities were clashing a little bit, and B, they kind of wanted to take the music a little further.
Like Rush would just, Neil is such a big part of Rush. Rush is one of the few bands that when you're listening to them, the drums are almost like the guitar lick or even the keyboard, like depending. It propels the song. You could tell he's one of the few drummers you could listen to the drums, not hear anything else, and kind of have a pretty good idea what song he's playing. His drumming is just, and I can't see Rush being Rush without that. It's such an integral part of their sound. So I know what you're saying with John, but I think that I don't think Rush would be Rush had they kept John if he didn't have those issues. I don't know. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, he had to go. I don't think he had the run that we know and love with John Rutsey on drums. And not that, if they would have followed along with the kind of the blueprint of the first album, I would have been okay with that at the time. Now knowing what we know, obviously we like the direction that all this went. But I love that first album, and I like that style of real heavy metallic kind of bluesy hard rock. So could I have enjoyed a few more albums like that? Yeah. But in saying that, I think we all know that we're all very happy with the fact that John Rutsey left and Neil came into the band. It's his history, right? It was inevitable almost.
Yeah, he's like the Pete Best of Rush.
Yeah.
You can't imagine the Beatles without Ringo.
It's funny you say that. You say Pete Best, and then because I often call Neil the Beatles of drummers, because he's like the guy writing hooks and riffs and memorable things on drums. He's like writing little songs on drums. You hit it perfectly, Hack, when you said basically the idea that you could almost know what song he's playing because of it, right? Because there's all the little percussion toys, there's the tuned tom-toms, the perfect little fills that he basically reproduces because he respects that the fans want to hear those fills reproduced. So he's basically one of the most songful drummers in terms of he's like writing little hooks and little riffs all over the place. And that's why he's the most air-drummed drummer of all time. You don't say that about John Bonham, but you say that about Neil. Like Neil's the most air-drumming, related, most air-drummed drummer of all time.
Yeah, and that's a similarity with Ringo. Ringo played the songs. The song just from some of Ringo's fills. You know what they're playing. They're just integral parts of the music, right? And you can't separate the two. All right, we're at the hour. Did you guys okay for another few minutes here? Or?
Sure.
All right, all right. I just want to mention that Martin has written some books on Rush. Here's the one that I got just yesterday, Anthem, which is the early history of Rush, Every Stone Unturned. And I've got a link to Martin's webpage below if anyone is interested in ordering one of Martin's books. And I can tell you that amazing package, hardcover, really nice, nice package here for sure. But I have that below. I also have a link to Pete's channel, which is Sea of Tranquility, below as well, which I would highly suggest. And both these gentlemen do a lot of shows together as well, on pretty much every topic you can imagine, and every band you can imagine, and every genre you can imagine. There's something there for everyone, that is for sure. Don is saying, I like the older songs reference J.R.R. Tolkien's literature. Do you like those songs or think they are too nerdy? The question is for all of you.
Not nerdy at all. I grew up on Tolkien, so that's why for me, those early Rush albums were like, yes, I totally know where this guy's coming from. Yeah, no, not nerdy at all. I think it's pretty cool, actually.
I didn't grow up on Tolkien, but I remember being, forced to read one of those, or maybe even both of those, in elementary school, right? But I remember loving them so much and being totally into them. So those songs didn't mean a lot more to me than the other songs, for example. No, to me, I was maybe even a little more like Pete says he is now, where I just wanted. The music was probably even more important, and I was literally like zeroing in on what are the heaviest Rush songs, right? I just wanted to hear the heaviest riff rockers, the fastest songs. That was my favorite stuff.
So Jason X makes a comment here. He thinks Geddy will do another solo album eventually. I hope they do something.
Well, a little bit of news on that. There was a big long article in the National Post, which is one of our major papers here in Canada, right? Geddy was profiled. And he wistfully talked about taking that first solo album out on tour. So he talked about, I wouldn't mind going out and playing that. I was playing the album again. I really, really like it. So I don't believe he talked about the next Geddy Lee album, but he seemed to talk about wanting to hit the tour trail as a solo artist.
Yeah, it would be very odd, and I don't think they would ever do it. Definitely not tour, but I don't think they would ever get together, Alex and Geddy, and put out new material. I can't see that happening.
As Rush or as something, or as anything else.
Well, as even calling themselves, I don't know, Geddy, Alec Lifeson, and Lee or something.
Yeah, you might be right.
I don't, you know what I mean? I think they wouldn't want to be categorized as, a pseudo Rush, or, you know what I mean? Geddy on his own, I could see him doing something, and I think he should. I know Alex Lifeson, from what interviews I've seen, he's doing a lot of guest spots on other people's records and things of that nature. I don't know if he's got, any idea of doing another solo record. He did Victor. That was like back in the 90s. But yeah, I can't see them doing anything together, although I would absolutely love it if they did, but I can't see them doing that. What do you guys think?
There's all this talk from the fans like, oh, why don't you guys get Mike Portnoy on drums and duet extension? And while I think that would be absolutely fantastic, I just don't think it's going to happen, because I don't think they want to disrespect Neil's legacy at all. And I think I get the impression, again, I haven't talked to him, but from what I've read, that Alex is enjoying his kind of retirement here. And I think that Geddy is getting the itch, and I think Geddy is going to go and do some stuff and play music again. And I just don't think anytime soon that they're going to do anything together, which is a shame. But yeah. It's a long time these guys were together, a really long time. And have they earned the break? Sure.
Oh yeah.
Sure. I'd love to see something again though, but I guess never say never, right? But they're still fairly youngish, right? So I think time will tell.
Well, now that Geddy's got that big book of bass out of his system, now he can get back to doing some music. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, and he did great with that book. He went on tour and he met a lot of people and talked and signed them and all that stuff. He had a great time with that. But no, I don't think they should do anything together either. And you know, there was always this narrative along with Rush all along the way that they probably would almost kind of in the back of their minds, certainly Neil would always be kind of looking for any excuse not to do Rush. They wanted to do other things. So, you know, and it would look kind of lousy if 2/3 of them got together or whatever. And I really don't feel that they would almost feel that that's too predictable, like the changing the producers all the time and just being creatively fearless and making a very different album next time from the one before and all that. They probably look at working together as just being too predictable. Like, why do this? Like, we'll work separately. One more point to make on that, like poor lead guitarists, right? If you aren't the lead vocalists of a band, you just have this awkward way of making solo albums, right? It's like, okay, do I get one vocalist? Do I get 10 vocalists, right? Tony Iommi or Geezer Butler or whatever. And then who is this vocalist? Is he now the star of the band, right? So Alex had the I Mother Earth guy and Geezer's got Burton C. Bell or whoever, right? And it's like, okay, well, but Geddy has, you know, he's got the lead vocalist in his band. So he can just go out and be a facsimile of Rush, essentially. I mean, or at least be much more of a one-man band than any of these, you know, poor guitarists that don't happen to be the lead singer of the band. You basically have to go out and make a new band. You know, and look at Alex. I mean, perfect case in point. No one knew what the hell to call that thing. Is it an Alex Lifeson album, and is it called Victor? Is the band called Victor? Blah, blah, blah. You never know what to call it, right? So, yeah, you're always in an odd situation. It's like, but it's kind of cool. Alex can go off and join a band, right? He can go off and join a supergroup if he wants. But yeah, I agree with Pete. I don't think it's in his bones to just keep making records all the rest of his life.
Yeah, and one thing I mean, and I've said this before about Rush, they're one of the few bands that went out the right way. You know what I mean? It's like, here's our farewell tour. We're going to play X amount of cities. And they played their last city, and they didn't, oh, we're going to add another leg in South America, and oh, we're going to go to Europe, and oh, we're coming back again. You know, it was just a one tour. They announced the dates. They did the dates, and that was it. You know, and I wish, being a Kiss fan, that they had done that like they should have back, 20 years ago now or whatever it was. But yeah, like they and the on that tour, and I think Pete, you said you saw that tour. They were amazing.
Yeah,
they were still at the top of their game. They were still nailing it. I mean, Geddy, little issues with the vocals here and there, but he was still a lot better than most of the guys that are out there trying to do it now, currently.
And they gave you like this retrospective song list. I mean,
right,
which was incredible. I mean, you basically heard just about almost everything you wanted to hear in that, what was like about 3-hour show.
Yeah.
Can't ask for much more than that, right?
The perfect way to button up their career, I thought. Did you see that that tour, Martin?
No, I don't think so. I would have seen something just very close behind that, maybe Snakes and Arrows, something like that. But no, I mean, what a brilliant idea, that whole thing about stripping down and bringing out the old gear and making it smaller and smaller. What a killer idea, right?
That was great.
They've never done that before.
They had the ramp sitting on, those wooden chairs that you'd see in the gym, right? Yeah. And they're playing these. I'll never forget this. They're playing these matching Paisley, Geddy and Alex. You remember this? Where they're playing like matching Paisley guitars.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen those pictures. That's
it's crazy. Like, it was just so well thought out, and through the whole production, like they were changing their amps out. Like if every few years they went back, they had less Marshall stacks, so they were carting them away.
Yeah,
until they were down to like one amp. It's great, man. It's so well done. So well done. All right. Before we wrap this up, I want to thank everyone in the chat that's in here. Thank you for the questions. Thanks for watching. We got 64 of you in here right now. Thank you all so much. If you want to, again, if you're interested in Martin's books, I have the link below his webpage. You can go on there and you can order up his books on Rush and a multitude of other bands. You can see them all listed there. Peter's channel, Sea of Tranquility, the link is also below there, so check that out. If you want to help support the Hack Show, I have links below as well I've got merch, I've got a PayPal down there, I've got email. Please, if you're not part of my YouTube group, join that, or just check out my Facebook page. There's Instagram, everything is down there, so check all that out. Before I let you guys go, is there anything that you guys wanted to mention, stuff upcoming, Martin?
Not particularly. No, this was a lot of fun. Very cool.
All right, Pete.
I will say tune in tomorrow. Martin and I, along with Chris Allo, will be doing a fun little rant program on Sea of Tranquility, all about fake out album covers. So have you ever bought an album where the cover looks one way, you buy it and you go and you put it on, you're like, wait a second, that kind of doesn't match what that cover looks like. Well, that's coming up tomorrow. Martin and I will also be back together again on Friday to rank the albums of Diamond Head, new wave of British heavy metal band. And I also want to mention next week, Mr. Hack will be on my show to talk about favorite guitar solos of Ace Frehley. So that's all upcoming over the next week.
Yeah, looking forward to that. That's going to be fun.
Yep.
All right. So with that, I'm going to let you all go. Guys, have a great week. You guys hang out for a second. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll catch you all soon.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers.